Hi, this is Alana Smith, and I'm hanging out with some people who really like stars and stripes in a circular shape.
Greetings, Cap fans, and welcome to episode 121 of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast. I'm your host, Rick Verbanis, and as always, I'm joined by the best gosh darn co-host out there. That is Mr. Bob Lucius. Oh, Bob. Knight jumps the queen. We all jump the queen.
Oh, Rick, it's good to be the king.
Hey, thank you. You got it. Thank you. Oh, hi, Bob. Yeah. So my opening my hello to you this time is codes, right? Because in the Captain America Sentinel of Liberty series, we have the Outer Circle, right? Which is this cabal of men and women who are trying to shape the world and the country through this century game, and they announce their moves like they do a chess move, right? They'll announce the power will do this, and so on. So I thought I would do a chess move, but not just any chess move. History of the World, Part 1, Mel Brooks.
It's so appropriate, Rick, right? Because it's the shaping of history.
Exactly.
Right? It's the telling of history and the events shaped, by the Outer Circle. So
exactly. Thank you for getting that. Thank you for getting that. And of course, here it is, decades and decades later. Mel Brooks' History of the World Part 2 is coming out. So I don't know about you, but I'm looking forward to seeing it.
I am too. It looks like it's going to be a four-part series on Hulu, and I've seen the trailer, and it looks like it's going to be a gas, man.
All-star cast, right?
Yeah.
It's so funny is now I will say this. You ever go back and rewatch a show, a movie, and you're like, oh, and you're talking to your wife and you're like, oh, this is so good. I remember this from my childhood, my adolescence, my teenage years. This is great. We need to watch this. It's hilarious.
Yes.
And then you sit and you watch it and you go, oh,
yeah.
It wasn't that funny.
It happened recently to me.
What was it? What was it?
I tried to convince my son to watch Young Frankenstein with me.
That happened to me.
And I remember I was like, this is hilarious. You're going to love it. And a lot of the jokes fell flat with me this time. I was like almost a little embarrassed, right? I mean, I still enjoyed it. I can enjoy watching it, but it didn't rise to the level that I think I raised expectations much too high for him.
I know the same thing happened. It's so funny. You should mention Young, and it's Frankenstein.
Yes, it is. Yes.
But a year or two ago, and I may have even mentioned it on this podcast, I was watching with my wife, and I was like, we were flipping around, like, what should we watch? What should we watch? And I was like, oh, you need to watch Young Frankenstein. You never saw that. She goes, no, I've never seen that. I'm like, oh, it's Mel Brooks. It's one of his earliest. It's hilarious. And we sat there, and at the end, she was like, it was okay. And I was like, yeah, it wasn't as funny as I remember.
Yeah,
so, I have my fingers crossed for History of the World Part 2.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. Loved Mel Brooks as a kid, loved him as a teenager and in my 20s, Spaceballs and Blazing Saddles and, Robin Hood, but some of the jokes don't hold up very well.
Yeah, they don't. Yeah. I don't know, maybe you got, I mean, I don't know what it is, right? Maybe I just had, maybe I was just more susceptible to the, his is kind of really, what's the description that you would, for Mel Brooks's
adolescent?
Yeah, adolescent. That's it. Yeah. And so when you're an adolescent, they really hit home really well.
Oh, yeah. You got booby jokes and fart jokes and
right.
you
Yeah.
know, boner jokes and
That's right. Biggest dickus. Yes. No,
yes. Oh, that's Monty Python.
that's Monty Python. That always hits well,
That does still Monty Python holds up.
It does hold up. Yeah.
Yeah, Monty
It hits
Python
you on
holds
many
up.
there's many different levels to Python. So.
Yeah. I think, you know, even like you know, we're watching Spaceballs, which I think was one of his better ones. That holds up, I would say. I don't know if it was one of his better movies, but it holds up a little better.
Yeah.
You know, some of those, I mean, great quotes, you know, your Schwartz is as big as mine, you know, or you know, she went from suck to blow, you know, on the spaceship, Lord Dark Helmet or whatever his name was.
Dark Helmet, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's hard to breathe in here.
It's a good film. We did watch that a lot, and when Bobby was younger. So
yeah.
We did enjoy that.
Poor John Candy. Miss him. He was good. He was good. All right. So let's get back to the comic, right? So we are talking a little bit about Captain America Sentinel of Liberty. And you know, today's episode, we are excited to have the writers, Jackson Lanzing and Collin Kelly, back on the show. They were here back on episode 91. So if you haven't listened to that one, go ahead. You can either listen to it now or go listen to it after this one. But in that one, it was just after Captain America Sentinel of Liberty #1 came out. And so that was 7 months ago. And we talked about what was it like working together? Like, what's a hive mind mean? And they kind of got into detail of that. They got into detail about the pitch. They got into detail about the research they did as Captain America fans and to be ready for this series. They got into a lot of, you know, details of some plans that they wanted to do and what they had envisioned for Cap. And so highly recommend, if you haven't listened to that, go check out episode 91. But I'm excited, Bob, to talk to Jackson and Collin today because now we've read, you know, issues 0 through 8, plus the Captain America Winter Soldier special. So we've got 10 issues really to reference here, and we're gonna get into it with them. We're gonna ask them about various things that have happened during the story, get some of our questions answered, and we're going to preview and get into Cold War, which is the big story, the crossover with the Sam Wilson Symbol of Truth series.
Coming down the pike. I'm excited, Rick. I wasn't here for the last interview. I wasn't able to make that one. So this is my first time thrown into the hive mind maelstrom. So I'm really excited to talk to these guys because this has been such an interesting and multi-layered series so far.
Absolutely agree. All right. Well, let's get them out of the green room and let's get to it. We're here with Jackson Lanzing and Collin Kelly. Welcome back to the show, guys.
Hey, thanks a lot for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Glad to be back.
And when we had you on back in July, we talked about revisiting after the first story arc ends, and you teased us. You said we may not be happy with you, and you may not want you back after reading issue 6. Well, we were very shocked and entertained by the first story arc of Captain America: Sentinel of Liberty. So we are excited to chat with you. So because we have so many questions.
That's very good. Half of us, or at least some part of the back of our minds, was afraid this was going to be an ambush, and you in fact were furious with us, and we were showing up to be pilloried. Which, if you want to have a spirited debate, we are absolutely here for it. But I'm glad to hear that you actually did like what we were throwing down.
Well, we had a feeling based on our last conversation because it really seemed like we were all very much on the same page. We're all Cap fans. We're all excited for this. We're all trying to tell the best story. So I think it was. I had an impression that we might be coming back. I just didn't want to counter chicken before we had.
Well, you know, first of all, you put words in my mouth, Collin. You said we liked it. I said I was shocked and entertained. I don't know. No. I did very much so. And so the first 6 issues story arc ended, and we have 3 issues that came out since then. So I want to tell our listeners, spoiler alert to anyone listening, if you haven't read Captain America Sentinel of Liberty 1 through 8, and the Captain America and Winter Soldier special #1, you've been warned. And by the way, I refer to that special as Captain America Sentinel of Liberty 6.5, because it just feels like, it's the epilogue, but more than an epilogue to 6.
That's how we think of it as well.
In the same way that the Winter Soldier annual, which was a tie-in to Dark Reign, is kind of like Captain America Sentinel of Liberty 0.5.
Yes. I think we mentioned that last time, and that was a great one shot too. That said, to the listeners, if you are the kind of person who waits for the trade, or if you have the issues but you like something on your shelf to read, the Captain America Sentinel of Liberty trade paperback Volume 1, Revolution, hits comic shops next week, February 8th. So make sure to pick it up. Now, that said,
next week from when this will air.
Oh, that makes more sense. I was like, man, that's exciting.
I also got momentarily very excited. We have been, we know a lot of people are trade waiters, but I think this trade is going to just blow their socks off.
We're really proud of the first arc on this, but also having it bundled with the annual and with Captain America 0, and I think even the Bucky Dark Reign one shot might be in there. Like they're really going, like we made a joke about how it's like the beefiest V1 trade of a Marvel book in a while, because it's just got we have so many sort of moving pieces in this run. And we know that there are a lot of people who wait for the trade. I'm one of them. I don't read a lot of books off the shelf. I read a lot of books in trade. And I know that those people are going to be discovering this story, all again. So I'm very excited to bring in people new into the story, to give them a shot at catching in with us on the second arc, The Invader, which has already started, and which is its own big, fun, crazy time before we get up into Cold War later this year. So it's like, I'm really we've had a lot of onboarding for this book, a lot of times for people could get on and really figure this out. But with Cold War coming up, and with that going to be kind of inescapable from a spoilers perspective, I'm hoping that trade waiters get on board this trade, discover that they can't wait for the next one, and
pick up the floppies.
Yeah, catch up with us as we head into the Cold War event.
Yeah. So what's been the fan reaction so far?
I mean, generally really positive. I think it's been a really lovely. The Cap fans in general have been a really positive experience for us, because even when they don't like an individual plot point, or they might be concerned about the way that something is handled, maybe because they've learned from Steve Rogers, and that's sort of what would Cap do aspect from that coin that now sits on my desk. I think there's a certain acceptance that wait, see, assume good faith, let's all try to work together, make something awesome.
I think good faith, is really the neat thing, because, obviously we're ready for people to come at us just because comics. Oh, my dog says hello to everyone. Watch out for the mailman or Arnim Zola outside.
You never know.
Exactly the same. But yes, everyone has been really, proactive and positive with their feedback, even if they don't necessarily click into what we're doing. And then we are seeing an incredible amount of enthusiasm from various different corners of the internet, right? There's people who Sharon Carter is the only character they absolutely care about, and they love what we're doing, right?
Or Bucky Barnes, which I thought a lot of Bucky fans would get really angry at us, and instead Bucky Barnes fans seem to have mostly embraced it, which has been very exciting to see. Even old Invaders fans, because we're bringing in characters like Destroyer who haven't been seen in a while, and lo and behold, that's bringing out different parts of that fan base. So that it's been really exciting to see them sort of come out of their individual burrows and talk to one another about how cool a Captain America book can be. And that was kind of one of our objectives, was let's bring a lot of corners of the Cap fan base together into this book, and that seems to be working out.
We have a gaggle of friends who are gaga for X-Men. Rest of the Marvel universe, they can absolutely take or leave, but X-Men, and of the X-Men, Emma Frost is their absolute queen. And they were blowing up our DMs and our texts, just how thrilled they were that finally we were giving them something to eat.
Very nice.
It's been fun.
Do you see, I'm just curious, I mean, it may be too early to tell, but do you see spikes in the sales when certain guest stars appear? Do the X-Men fan?
We don't see that information.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Truthfully, I have no idea what the book is selling.
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
Zero idea. So I hope so, but we don't do it for the spikes, you know. Like,
Right.
We do it because the character has a relevance in the story. We know we need the character, and we know that we want to do something, so we do that. But honestly, I think it's almost best that we don't know our sales for Marvel and DC books, because it allows you to try to treat it as sort of creatively neutral as possible, and not try to do things for the sales.
You can't chase trends, because obviously we're writing things 6 months ahead of when the actual trend is dropping. So chasing that kind of stuff is
very hard.
Is a mind killer. Yeah.
And so, you mentioned about the different groups of people that are coming out, of the woodwork and with their reaction. So it's fun reading the letters, in the back of the comics, right? And in fact, in issue 8, 2 of the show's patrons, Grant Ball and Ash Barnes, had their letters published. So that was kind of cool seeing, because we're like, I know those people. And they're listening right now if you want to say hi.
Hey, hello. Yeah. I mean, writing, look, obviously, I think we spoke about this the last time we sat in. This is a kind of a dream gig, and we're kind of pinching ourselves still. But when we got to do those letters columns, it all started to click into place. That's the stuff that I think all of us were just, salivating over when we first got into comics. The idea that there was no real barrier between you and the creators creating the things that you love, because they were just like you. And now we're kind of living proof of that as we sit on the other side of the screen. And those letters columns are, yes, we get a little silly. Obviously, you have to get a little silly with a Marvel letters column.
Yeah, there's some kidding to it.
But it's absolutely, it's a dream. And way to go, Ash. Great questions.
In our last chat, talking about the hive mind, we discussed how that worked, right? And how the two of you work. You take the editor approved outline. You two worked on, and then you split the script, with one of you working on the first 10 pages, the other last 10 pages, and then you regroup and you see each other's work and you clean it up, more or less. Yep. Now that you're much deeper into the series, is that still the case, or has one of you gravitated to Steve and the other one Bucky, or enjoys writing the Outer Circle, for example?
You want this answer, and I'm telling you, my friend, unfortunately, 50-50.
Yeah, it really is. I'd argue that in practice, what's happened a lot, and it's not in this, and this really I don't think indicates a preference. It's just how it's floated out. Is that Colin has written a little bit more of the Steve at home with his friends stuff, not exclusively. I've written a lot of it, but the first draft of a lot of that stuff ends up with Colin, and the first draft of a lot of the like Outer Circle psycho-historical stuff might end up on me, but that's it doesn't indicate a preference. It's just how that stuff's ended up getting sorted. There's still a lot of that's written by Colin, and still a lot of the personal stuff that's written by me. So I don't think that there's necessarily like a preference there. It's just that you do end up kind of sorting stuff out as we go. That said, it's not like we get to a script and go, all right, you're the Sharon Carter guy, I'm the Bucky Barnes guy, so let's split that up that way. No, like we'll fight over writing a great beat because we want to write a great beat. Yeah. The way that tends to actually get cornered out is we genuinely look at the other guy and say, and sometimes I'll do it and sometimes he'll do it. It's basically whoever gets there first goes, hey, you got a part of this you want to write? Yep. And then we just wait until the other guy has an answer, and you sort of give that guy first dibs, and we just try to swap that off.
And the important thing too is like, since we are working on so many books at once, for example, if we're popping off a Batman Beyond at the same time we're writing a cap, it's very possible that in the back half of the Batman Beyond issue we're writing, I might be writing nothing but 10 pages of pure action. Love that. I do not want to then go turn around and do that with Captain America. So it's like we gotta kind of mix it up and make sure that we're writing different stuff, because otherwise,
it'll just stagnate, right? We got to keep it fresh, and that does tend to work out really nicely.
So back in episode 86, we interviewed Alana Smith, the editor, and at that time she said that when she heard your pitch, it blew her mind. And so now, retrospectively, now that we've read that first arc, Revolution, we know why. The story is huge. And as you go back and you reread it, and knowing what we know now, there's so many layers that you two have built to build this story and the backstory that goes with it. So that, begs the question, how far out do you plot these stories? And I mean, can you give some insights into, does this stuff just pop up, or do you guys have to, germinate this stuff for a long time?
I mean, so fortunately with our stuff in general, it is a mix of both. Because of the way that we work, that's why I say fortunately, because of the way that we work, we have to talk stuff out. Stuff that wouldn't, an individual writer, because we are a hive minded, and that does seem abnormal in some respects. Certainly it is in comics. An individual writer doesn't necessarily have to work everything out on the page. They can run a shell game and sort of be like, I'm going to give you an answer. And then eventually when they have to give the answer, they got to figure it out and look back over everything they went, oh, okay, what it is. With Colin and I, because we have to be setting up the same stuff, it's really important we talk stuff out. We tend to know an answer at least 6 issues in advance for any mystery that we'll set. So if we're gonna set, we've talked a lot about our Sharon Carter plan, so that's actually maybe a good reference because we haven't gotten to the end of that yet, and so I can't spoil it. We knew before we ever wrote issue 1 of Sentinel of Liberty that Sharon Carter was going to show up in issue 7 of Sentinel of Liberty. We knew that she was going to re-enter the book then, and because we had a lot of other stuff we had to deal with before we were able to actually put our focus on Sharon. We knew that when she was there, we wanted to put focus on her. She's a character who can get lost in these stories a little bit, and who's one of our faves, and we wanted to make sure that we were giving her story territory. So we knew we were going to wait for 7. So reasonably, that's all we needed to know. She's going to show up in 7. Except we also knew what we were going to set up in 7.
Yeah.
We knew where that was going to go from 8, 9, 10. We knew where that was going to leave her in 11, and we knew where that was going to take her in Cold War. We pitched all of that on the first document that we gave to Alana. So that's about a year. That's about a year plus of story, right? That's about 13, 14 months of story that we're pitching at the beginning of the process. And that isn't to say we had all of that worked out, right? No. We certainly didn't have the individual beats of it. We weren't sitting there saying, here's what's in issue 7, here's what's in issue 8, here's what's in issue 9. But there's 3 sentences that if you look at it, you're like, okay, well, that's her entire arc.
I will say we knew the 3 parts. We know kind of the 3 acts of Sharon, once again, of where we want Sharon to go. But at no point in those opening documents was there ever the words Cold War, right? That's a perfect example of yes, we roll in, we have 3 years of plan, and they say, oh yeah, by the way, in 12 months you're doing an event called Cold War. We're like, oh, great to know. Which then means that we could kind of take what we had to yes, obviously, and it detonates some of our plans, but then we're able to remix. So when we do get those kind of notes, it's not like we have to scramble to try and figure out what it's going to be. We already know where our characters are going.
Yeah.
It's just going to be about shifting it and turning it into a huge, massive event. And once again, Cold War was not in our plans, but it has since become the core of them. And it's going to be so damn cool, my guys.
I think that's the interesting thing about Cold War is while it was not in the original plan, it got in there pretty quickly because we knew we were doing it by the time we started the book properly. So there was a sense of okay, that's where we're heading. But what is that? Well, that's going to have to come out of Sam's book as well. So we need to let Tochi figure out his story road. And so a lot of that stuff had to be relatively vague until we got close enough that we could reasonably plot it as a crossover. Once we got to that point, taking stuff from, okay, here's what we're doing in year 2 of Sentinel of Liberty and porting it into Cold War became, obvious. It became the thing you had to do because in many ways, Cold War is the second year of Sentinel of Liberty. It just happens to have aspects that we had never planned on bringing into the book that suddenly opened up all this new story territory. So it was it became a way of expressing all of these relatively vague thoughts that we had in the original document in a very concrete way. So it ended up sort of solving that issue.
Well,
so
all right.
We do a lot of planning.
Sure.
But then I do want to sort of say the cross of that is, and because I don't want anybody who's reading who's listening to this who is a writer or wants to be a writer to get the wrong impression. You do want to get to a stage where even though you have it all worked out, you're finding cool, exciting ways of dropping new pieces in. So because we knew what we were doing, because we knew what the outer circle was, for instance, and we knew Bucky was going to get to that state at the end of 5, make the decision he was going to make at the end of 6, and then have an issue to develop that in the annual. We knew that then we could plant a bunch of stuff back in the book And that wasn't like we sat there and said, here's all the things we're going to plant. Colin planted some stuff and I planted some stuff. And we did that our own way as we went, sort of holistically. But because we both knew the answer, we could do that. That makes sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I know there's probably are some aspiring writers out there, that always loves those kind of tidbits. But I want to, before I want to get into Cold War, I want to get into Sharon. But before I do that, I want to go kind of just follow up on a few things that we talked about last time, because you mentioned some goals, right? And one of the goals you mentioned was to give Steve a life. You said very clearly, Steve didn't have a life, right? And we talked about his civilian friends that you introduced in number 1. And you said your plan was to have the series focus 50% on Cap, 50% on Steve. What were some of the highlights to the both of you about Steve's personal life that you were able to get very far with your plans?
Oh, I mean, I'm gonna die on this hill is one of the things that I'm more proud of than anything, which was like underlining and reinforcing the idea that Steve Rogers is a Brooklyn Dodgers fan. That was like, it's a piece of canon from way back, from like the original run, and I was happy to dust it off, bring it back to life. A huge Dodger fan here in LA. Sorry, rest of the country. So I was super proud to be able to kind of slip that in there, just as kind of like a little personal treat for me.
Nice.
Yeah, that's one of the few things where we've gotten actual shit from some New York people for that. They were like, even if you're a Brooklyn person, blah blah blah. And I was like, Steve Rogers doesn't care, man. Plant yourself like a tree.
And we will get into plant yourself like a tree too.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think that's what Colin talks about there is typical of what we discovered about this guy. What's fun about him is that he is a man at a time, like fundamentally, and so that's always going to give you weird ways to make him quirky and like give him weird little quirks. But otherwise, the thing that every scene kept reinforcing and that is continued to reinforce is something that initially feels really daunting to write, but ultimately I find is really satisfying and kind of therapeutic to write, which is just that Steve is a very decent man, that he is fundamentally decent, and that he doesn't allow that decency to be defined by a time period or defined by a certain set of social mores. He understands that decency evolves and that he has to evolve, and that decency is an sort of ever-running conversation. It's a way of listening. It's a way of understanding. It's a way of seeking consensus and understanding. I mean, honestly, it's very similar to a lot of the principles that we use as our baseline for Star Trek, as the writers of Star Trek, where the idea here is to look into the unknown and see oneself. And so when we got to say issue 4 of Sentinel of Liberty, which is my pride and joy, I love that issue so much, and I think that issue is a beautiful example of what you can do with Steve. It's really hard to do that issue with Tony. Like, it's very hard to do that issue with Black Widow or with any of the other F4, certainly.
Well, none of them are really willing to listen. Right. Like, I think that's one of the, because this is a perfect example.
Just about Steve listening, right? And then at the end of the issue, understanding the idea that he's not listening, he's pulling this out so that he can teach a thing to listen. He can teach Redacted to listen, and that Redacted learns from Steve, learns from these people, and that is Steve's superpower. Not that he can hold a shield really far, but that he can fundamentally see the good in someone and learn how to inspire that person to their best behavior and to their best decency. And like, that's a thing that scales from like really, really big action stuff to really, really tiny scene work.
But it was a beautiful combination of both. And so issue 4 probably was my favorite. And
Tom Brevoort's favorite too.
Is it really?
He didn't have notes on.
Yeah.
The only time, I'm sure you might have heard of this in the past, but like Tom is very like scant with praise. Like, if you get praise, it's a big deal. And that one issue he just wrote like, reads good.
Nice.
Nice. Even Alana was like, "You guys got a reads good."
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because we got to see Steve in his civilian identity. He's questioning his friends about what does a shield mean. He's questioning himself the whole time. He's really sending a message to the cloaked assassin trailing him, the Redacted, right? And he's trying to get him to think for himself and stop following the outer circle's, orders. And so not only as a great speech to the Hall of Cap speeches, but shows how Steve is always trying to reason first before using his fists. Love that. Absolutely love that.
Really one of our, I mean, yes.
All right. So speaking of speeches, I want to get to Bucky gives a great one to Steve in issue 6 after he shoots him and the revolution. And he references Steve's plant yourself like a tree speech given that he gave to Spider-Man, kind of throwing it back in his face. I thought this really hit home the difference in philosophy between Steve and Bucky.
Yeah.
Well, and that's it's the core of the book, right? That the thesis behind the book that we just we outline in 4, and then look again at in 6, right? And that contrast is the pitch. Like if you go back to the original pitch of this book, it was like, what if we put Bucky and Cap at odds? What does that really look like? How do you put them at odds without doing it artificially, right? Without doing, which ideally we've done. The idea here is to not be like, here is a
the mind control.
Yeah, right. Or just like, oh, both men want the same thing, so they're gonna fight each other for this thing, but like there's not actually a conflict between the two of them. Like, no, this has to be a fundamental argument between these two men about how they operate and like what they're willing to do. And Bucky, ever since the Brubaker run and the sort of recharacterization of Bucky, one of the things that they have been really insistent about is that Bucky was the guy who did the stuff that Cap couldn't.
Yeah.
That Bucky was, though younger and sidekick, was the person you put into the darkness. Well, at some point or another, that had to become a problem in the modern day, because that means that Bucky is putting himself in front of the bullet all the time. He knows that he's like Cap's Sin Eater. And the last thing Steve Rogers ever wants is to have a Sin Eater at all, let alone for it to be this man he loves and respects. So it felt like such a torturous moment for Steve, for him to realize like, oh, I have actually like allowed my friend to think this for that long, to the point that he's willing to do this kind of stuff and go as far as to injure me. So like as Namor kind of rolls out in issue 7, the bullet wound is not what's hurting Steve.
Right.
What hurts Steve is that Bucky fundamentally disagrees with the way that Steve operates, and does so in order to keep Steve pure, like that he does so in part because he wants Steve to remain a good person, and Bucky has to sort of accept that he, quote unquote, isn't. And that's a hard run. It's a hard thing.
And that's heavy for Steve to see, like you said, the man that he loves doing that for him. All right. So I do have to ask you guys, because this has been a topic of conversation on the show and in our Facebook group about that quote, right? So from Amazing Spider-Man 537, by J. Michael Straczynski, and he's talking to Spider-Man, and he says, doesn't matter what the press says, doesn't matter what the politicians or the mob say, doesn't matter if the whole country decides that something's wrong, is something right. This nation was founded on one principle above all else: the requirement that we stand up for what we believe, no matter the odds or the consequences. When the mob and the press and the whole world tell you to move, your job is to plant yourself like a tree beside the river of truth and tell the whole world, no, you move. What do you guys think of that quote?
Ooh.
I think it relies on having the moral conscience of Steve Rogers.
Thank you.
Well,
thank you.
He put a minefield down and you just tiptoed right through it, my friend.
Look, we've given that quote a lot of thought. JMS is one of the great writers of pulp fiction ever.
First and foremost, yes, it's a beautiful quote. It is an amazing Steve Rogers line. Like,
Babylon 5 changed my life. I love J. Michael Straczynski's work. It means the absolute world to me. But that quote only works if you're Steve Rogers. Steve's ability is to do that. But if you ask somebody else who doesn't have an evolved moral compass to stand beside the river of truth and tell the mob to move when the mob thinks something right is something wrong, right? You could easily look at yourself and be like, oh, well, I'm fighting for something that I believe is justice, but actually is injustice. Like, and that actually is, how do you determine that? Who determines that? That's deep politics stuff. And that's why we have division in America. Like it's a core concern. Steve is the one person, because it's his superpower. That's the buy, is that he's so decent that he knows what's right and wrong fundamentally. Can you tell I was Team Cap in Civil War? Can you tell?
Colin, you agree?
I do. I mean, it's a slippery, it is the most slippery slope. And I think it's going to be, as we unpack and explore the revolution more, Bucky more, we will find that that's really at the key to his entire argument. It is, I always think interesting that Steve tells that to Peter Parker, because as screwy as Spider-Man is, I think Peter Parker is as close to a Steve Rogers as you can get. I love Peter, I love Steve, and I think Peter almost has as clear of a conscience as Steve Rogers.
In a very different way.
In a very different way, but like...
Well, that's why we have in issue 1, that's a Colin.
Oh,
thing.
Yep.
In issue 1, it's very few times I'll be like, Colin wrote that, but like, it was a fucking great beat, and he wrote it. Is that Steve has a key, his key tray that he used.
Oh, yeah.
The Spider-Man tray. Because obviously Spider-Man is his favorite hero. Like, obviously, of course he is. It makes total sense to me.
Nice.
I think he sees himself in Pete.
Very nice. One other thing, when you were last year, you as far as goals were concerned for this story, you wanted to create a new suite of villains, a new problem Steve hasn't seen before, to really challenge him, not just as a superhero, but as a man. And I think mission accomplished, guys, with the Outer Circle. First of all, you introduced it in issue 2, and you gave the backstory in that Winter Soldier Special #1, which we talked about. And so, it's this cabal of powerful men and women who pull the strings of government and people in secret to ensure a measure of peace and stability. Now, one of our patrons asked the question, is Captain America the first superhero that's encountered the Outer Circle so far in the Marvel Universe? Or is this an organization, something that the Illuminati knew about but kept hidden?
Ooh,
that's a great question.
That's a great question, patron of the podcast.
My instinct, so obviously that's not just for us to decide. Once you put something in the Marvel Universe, it's in the Marvel Universe, right? So if in 5 years somebody decides to use the Outer Circle in something set in the 80s and some Punisher runs up against them or whatever, like, I don't know, man. Maybe our thinking is people have encountered the Outer Circle through the Star Points, through their agents over the course of the 20th century. That's how people have encountered them. So if anybody's gotten close, they've gotten close because of the Star Points, or they've been taken out by a Star Point. Or they've been a Star Point, right, and discarded and not known,
because
or whatever.
That cast of Star Points has been rotating for the last 70 years.
Yeah, so they're like Heralds of Galactus.
Exactly.
They're like Heralds of Galactus, exactly. And so as we go through that, the idea of how you encounter them and who's encountered them is, I think, a big question. In terms of who's actually going to be encountering them in a way that's very specific and now, yeah, obviously it's Steve and Bucky. Did the Illuminati know about them? Probably not. I think if the Illuminati knew about them, they would have dealt with them. But I also think in some ways they are a smaller game than the Illuminati plays. The Illuminati was playing like superpower games. That was really they weren't shaping history. They were shaping the Beyonder, and these larger, they were worried about Steve's memories. They were worried about superhero drama. That was and I love the Illuminati for that. Yeah. They're kind of a bunch of they're like the popular kids at the nerds at the table. They're the nerd clique looking at all the popular kids and being like, we can secretly control you. I love that. Great.
But the Outer Circle are the cool kids who are actually controlling things, right? And it's very important
in mundane human history, which is not the same as superpowered history.
Yeah, I think that's the really important thing, is that they are manipulating. Yes, there are superheroes and superpowered elements that have been manipulated by the Outer Circle, but they are far more active in world economies and product streams, supply chains, right? Culture. This is where they've been really pulling the strings. And when it comes to the Illuminati, is there someone on the Illuminati who's going to look at the the cultural backlash of Banksy's art? No, but Banksy was very specifically an Outer Circle pawn, right? I'm making that up, obviously, but there's
or is he?
Yeah, and I think that's the way I think. We kind of hope that once the Outer Circle was in play, then you can look at any 20th century historical event through the lens of the Outer Circle and be like, was this part of the century game or not? and we have certain ideas about like what certain stuff means, and we'll see if we get to all of that by the time our run is done. But like that's the ideal. The thing, I think the thing that I'm excited about ultimately about them is that they put a lens on a problem that isn't about big superhero nonsense. And I love big superhero nonsense, obviously, but it's very nice to be able to say, like, look, here's a supervillain that isn't really interested in what Magneto is doing. They are interested in whether or not they can sell you another year of whatever, of consumer products or of fascism or whatever it is they're, that particular player.
They're called subscription services, Jackson.
Thank you. Yeah. But yeah, I think that's a move. Also, and I think we said this sort of publicly, but like it's relatively clear Krakoa was not part of their plan.
Yeah.
But that's like the one big world event that like happened between Century games. The old Century game ended, Krakoa happened, and then the new Century game started, and they were like, we turned our back for 1 minute. 1 minute. And the mutants upended everything. But they don't seem to they seem to just be kind of moving beyond that and trying to ignore Krakoa, which seemed like the best move for us too, because all of that is like there's so much of it, and the last thing we wanted to do was get time.
Well, I also think that the Outer Circle very smartly were like, you know what? Krakoa, whoa, that's a mutant problem. And if there's one thing we know about mutants is they fall the fuck apart.
Yeah, they will eventually solve that problem themselves. So
Yeah,
we'll just
let them deal with it.
Yeah.
I am so eager to see who's on that roster of former Star Points. I got to tell you, that has got me on pins and needles, quite honestly.
Yep. We know. we got answers.
We got ideas.
Oh, I can't wait. I bet there's going to be some surprises in there, right? Am I right?
No, you will know all of them.
Really?
Now you'll know. One would.
Yeah. We would really love to get really deep, and we would be honored and privileged to tell every single story of the Outer Circle, right? If we could do decade by decade Outer Circle, like that'd be amazing. But we also respectfully leave gaps and spaces in their story open for other people to play.
Well, that makes me curious. So, as revealed in Captain America and the Winter Soldier Special #1, over the century, the Outer Circle has influenced various world events over the last century, right? So FDR winning the election in 1932, World War II breaking out, the first full-scale test of a thermonuclear device, JFK's birthday song by Marilyn Monroe, Bloody Sunday in Northern Ireland, the Falklands War, the fall of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s, the introduction of the euro currency, International Space Station being launched in 2012. Interesting, they all end in twos. So there's two things. First thing I want to say is, one of the things I love about comics is, it's well known that comics help young kids read, learn to read, right? But the other I love about this is I'm a history fan. I love history. Yes. And this is getting people interested in historical events and causing them to go like, what the hell is he talking about? I got to look that up, pull out the Encyclopedia Britannica off the shelf, for those who still have those or Wikipedia. So I think that's a magnificent use of this genre to teach history as well, or to cause people to be curious about history.
I would hope so. Yeah.
But beyond the real life historical events, what about Marvel characters and events, right? Has the Outer Circle influenced anything we may know in the Marvel universe, like the formation of Stark Enterprises or the establishment of S.H.I.E.L.D. or its dissolution or the Superpowers Registration Act and Civil War, to name a few?
So I think it's those are the questions we want people to be answering. The questions we obviously cannot answer without spoiling individual stories we might get to tell someday. What I will say is that we've been pretty clear in that issue. They draw the map, right? What it is that they encompass. And one of the core things that they encompass is the sort of military-industrial complex, is like the way what Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex, right? The summation of defense and offensive interests, not just in America, but globally. And the idea that those things, that any actions that those things take are really a big core aspect of what the Outer Circle does. Obviously also culture and wider human affairs and to some degree superheroic affairs. But when you get into the world of like espionage and military, I think that's where you can say, okay, there's a pretty fundamental one-to-one to the Outer Circle had a hand in this. So like, for instance, I think it would be very cool to go back and read the Steranko Nick Fury run
Hmm.
through the eyes of S.H.I.E.L.D. is part of this game, and so is Hydra, and so it like that these aspects, that all these things, that is a little bit of a shell game, which in reality it is, right? In reality, espionage is at least in part a shell game between other countries to keep everybody out of Cold War so they don't get to a hot war. Because the objective of the Outer Circle, by and large, is to avoid hot war. Obviously, they really failed at that in World War II. And the story of what's up with World War II, including what's up with the invaders and what's up with Red Skull and what's up with all that, that's all stuff we'd really love to tell. If there's one Outer Circle story we get to tell, I really hope someday we get to tell the story of how the Outer Circle, how their objectives at the end of World War I failed so violently in World War II that they became what they were. I think that's a formative aspect for them. It just didn't fit in the special.
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of, in our minds at least, a lot of World War II is their fault. With the caveat of Hitler was not in the plan. Right. Like that was just, it's kind of important for us. Like these can be terrible people. They have done truly awful things, but there's a level of Red Skullitude that is really difficult to come back from.
Well, and it also just felt important to be like that no one's answer was purely Nazism, right? That like Nazism was a thing that was coming up in culture as it stood and was coming out of a bunch of national grievance, and we didn't want to be like, oh, well, that's a conspiracy by like 5 people who like made you believe Nazis. That felt both anti-historical and too clean. And so in general, what we're trying to do with the Outer Circle is less, aha, we're controlling everything, and more reactive. I'm seeing what's happening and I'm using that as a move. I'm seeing what's happening and I'm using that as a move. And ideally, I'm trying to do that to maintain a certain degree of peace and understanding. And so that's, but that it keeps us away from being too much like, oh, this one historical event was like fully put together by them. It's like, no, a lot of that was extant. They didn't cause anybody to be born or become famous necessarily. They just, they moved those things. They're less, this is a weird metaphor, but like they're doing Tai Chi forms.
Bro, I was just about to be like, they're not doing Krav Maga. They're doing.
No way. It's almost like a hive mind.
Yeah. Goodness
all
gracious.
right, so let's
Now
move
you
on
have
from the
people
Outer
looking up
Circle.
Krav Maga. So
Yeah,
congratulations.
straight up, what you just said about making this a place where people can find history, entirely our objective. Like that is not an accident. We wanted to do that.
Awesome.
Comics are in part an educational medium. We love that. Colin is an educator. Like I just write comic books. But I really genuinely like, that was a big part. So it means a lot to us that you say that, because that is an objective.
To peek behind the curtain, we have always been talking about, who knows if we'll ever actually do it, but create effectively an at-home version of the Century game. So you can play as the Outer Circle with your friends.
Oh my God, that would be so awesome.
We did that to do the plot. When we were first starting on Cap, we were like, what if we just run the Century game? We recruit 5 of our friends, we tell them how it works, we run the Century, and they can't break away from established history, but they can tell us how it happened, and we can go decade by decade and build a whole story. And then our Captain America #1 deadline snuck up on us, and we were like, never mind.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate that.
Yeah. Everyone has to have the creative project that they do when they're tired of their other creative project. Generally, my creative project is some kind of bespoke tabletop RPG system that may or may not ever see the light of day.
Well, welcome to my podcast. All right, so let's get away from Outer Circle a little bit. Talk about the 5 star points, right? So in issue 3, Bucky goes to tell Peggy Carter about the star points and how she's been manipulated during this time. And at one point, Peggy had been retconned so much that I wonder if her appearances, like from the early appearances with Steve Englehart and the later and Mark Gruenwald ones, I don't know, do they no longer exist? Because are you basically picking up where Coates retconned her in 2019, or will there ever be a nod to what went before?
So my premise, I think our premise is that all of it happened.
Yeah.
That Peggy's entire life has happened. that the retcon that was made in Coates' run was kind of an extension of that, right? It was less going back and being like, let's rethink all of that. And more saying, okay, the reason that we've been able to tell stories with her in all decades is that she survived, through the Daughters of Liberty and through the immortality and through all of that, and has sort of been on this journey the whole time. So our thinking is, like most immortals, you get a little lost in your own life story once you get 100 years into it, and that Peggy is at this point learning the degree to which her life has been a lie. Whether or not that, we're not trying to preclude we're never trying to take a story out of the canon.
Yeah, I think her life as a lie is an interesting.
The idea here is to reframe her life and say, okay, a lot of the things that you did as both a member of S.H.I.E.L.D., a member of the Army, a member of the military-industrial complex, and also as a member of the Daughters of Liberty was towards objectives that you never could have imagined, and towards a unified objective for the Outer Circle that you couldn't have imagined. So that while those stories all happened, their ramifications are different. And like we even call out some individual missions in that issue issue 3, that are actual like canon events for Peggy, because those are actual, like, those have issues. In
our mind a little bit over the course of the 20th century, the Outer Circle was effectively using the Winter Soldier as their hammer. Right? When you needed something just fucking broken, that's why you had Bucky. But when you needed soft force, when you needed someone charming, when you needed someone to work a room, that's when you had Peggy.
Nice. I like that. So let's get to something Bucky told Peggy in the special, and that was about Steve's birthday. Now, she said, he said, quote, "the real one, not that July 4th crap." So, okay, you got my attention. I've always felt that this was very forced and a byproduct of some like poor Army marketing. So was this a throwaway line, or are we going to say anything more about that?
It is not it is not a throwaway line, and we're also not going to say anything more about it. Truthfully, I think both can be true. Like, I think it would ruin it if we told you what it was.
Sure.
Which is to say that we don't. I'm not saying here like that I know Steve Rogers' birthday.
Yeah, we're not teasing you here.
That's not the point. The point is to say that the birthday is more special in fiction if only a couple of people know it and the audience is on the outside of that. It creates a more unique and more exciting little grace note thread for us anyway. If it's a thing that Peggy and Bucky and Sharon and probably very few other people know.
Yeah.
Nice.
To indicate the people who have gotten close enough to Steve that he has let them into his like squishy insecurity heart, which is obviously the core of our book, right? Is how do you what's the squishy sentimental person at the heart of Captain America? When you get into him enough, he'll tell you his birthday. So like I think that's sort of the audience isn't his best friend, so the audience doesn't get to know.
But also, we agree with you. The Born on the 4th of July stuff seems absolutely like military propaganda. It's super schmaltzy as hell. And editorial didn't take the line out.
Exactly. Suffice to say, I do think it's canon that July 4th is not his birthday.
Yeah.
And that it is that was a thing the Army did. But as for his actual birthday, I hope we never know.
It's October 16th.
I hope we never know.
October 16th.
So what I hear you saying is, except for our listeners who were born on July 4th, we could potentially all share Cap's birthday. Because I'm going with that.
I love that.
Excellent.
I feel like everybody who was born on the 4th of July, though, who is a listener, is like, oh man,
come on. Sorry, guys. But hey, you got America, so
that's right. Yeah, there you go. Right.
You have a pretty weird Tom Cruise movie, so that's cool.
That's right. So speaking of age and birthdays, with Marvel's sliding timeline, how long do you think Captain America has been out of the ice? Right. Well, I mean, we asked Tochi. We asked Tochi this, and he thought about it, and he thinks Sam has been in the superhero business for about 10 years as he's writing him. Although if he had a week to think about it, maybe he'd answer differently. So have you given it any thought? Like in Marvel's sliding timeline, at what point in Steve's time since he came out of the ice are these stories taking place?
It's really hard to say that stuff because I think ultimately there is just such a history, and the sliding timeline creates a certain aspect of like unreality to this. I think 10 years for Sam sounds about right. I not to tell Tochi his business, like that sounds about right. I imagine Steve's been out of the ice for at least that long. I don't think it's more than 20. So I think somewhere between 10 and 20 sounds about right as like a permanent place for him right now.
Colin has this like his nose wrinkled here. He's just...
Guys, I don't know, man. To me, there's so much of Cap's history that is just 90s, and I can't divorce myself of it. It just happens in the 90s. And if you're like, oh no, he was a werewolf in like 2020 or like 2004, I'm like, no, like 1997. That's the only, 1994, I think.
And this is why we don't get into sliding timeline.
Yeah, it just gets so wildly messy. Like
all right. So all right, talking about wildly messy. I want to get into Sharon Carter. All right. So
our messy queen.
Yes. So in issue 7, right? You mentioned Jackson before, like this is when you brought her back. You knew you were going to bring her back. The last time you were on, we discussed how Colin likes to bring sex into stories. Jackson, not so much, something more romantic. And you guys laughed when I brought this up, and you said my question was ironically timed. So I can only guess you were writing that scene at the time.
Yes.
One can assume, yes.
Absolutely.
So Steve gets a booty call, and we get a page devoted to them cuddling the morning after. So did Colin win out?
Oh God. I did do the first pass on that stuff.
You definitely did.
I absolutely did the first pass on it.
In fact, Colin did the first pass on the entirety of that issue.
Oh,
we actually had to double ship Captain America at that time. So I did the entire first pass on the Winter Soldier annual, and he did the entire first pass on the 7. They both got rewritten to high heaven, but I
forgot about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But I do recall what I did. It's actually funny because as we tuned, I had that post-coital kind of morning bliss scene. They were very specifically talking about Bucky.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and how his heart was broken.
Weird, like your best friend. He's like, I know, my heart is. Then Jack's like, they just fucked. And they're talking about his best friend in bed.
While they're not wearing any clothes, yeah.
And I was like, that's a good point. That's a good. And I was like, what? I don't know. When I'm lying in bed with my wife, I talk about you all the time. But it was like, no, strip that stuff out. But more importantly, it was like, why the fuck are they talking about plot?
Right.
Like, they're not talking about plot. They are the most vulnerable. They need to be speaking from the heart. And like, I think that's the kind of the fun thing, because yeah, we can get tangled up in so much of this stuff. And at the end of the day, it's not about sex, right? It's so funny. A film professor told me this once. It's not about sex. It's about the scent of lavender in the air. Oh God.
Oh.
It was. Yeah. But right, it's not about sex. It is about romance. Right. And when it's about sex, hell yeah, it's about sex. But sex is just an action scene without clothes on, unless there is actually an emotional hook. And I think that was something that Jack injected into Jack stuck into that sex scene.
No, I mean I took the sex out of the sex scene. Yeah, that sounds like me.
Yeah, it was all off panel.
You made it sensitive instead of horny.
Yeah, which effectively.
I also want to take this moment to laud Carmen Canero's contribution.
As
well.
You can take whatever you want. Like honestly, for a long time, we just kept the page almost entirely silent. Like we rewrote, that was the page we've rewritten the most, probably, because we were really trying to make sure it like landed, and like it was always right. Like physicals were always right. The panel descriptions were always right. It was always like, what are they talking about and how are they expressing it? Because this is such a vulnerable moment for Steve, but it's also like Sharon's just come back into the book, and like we want to make sure that this doesn't feel like she just rolled in for a sex scene, right? Like this is the beginning.
Well, she didn't. Not because you know what, you mentioned it last time. You said you had your plans for Sharon weren't exactly romantic. So that tells me at the very end of Captain America and Winter Soldier special, right? The very end, Bucky as the new Revolution, he announces his move. Sharon Carter to Captain America. Is she manipulating Steve?
No. She is not a star point. She is not taking orders from Bucky. Bucky does this, and those subtle aspects of it. Her mission, which is I think we established was her in Alaska dealing with militia people, has been curtailed. It's stopped. She's been sent home. She has the opportunity to come back to Steve. That stuff is arranged by Bucky and is manipulated by Bucky. That does not mean that Sharon is manipulating the encounter at all. Sharon is exactly who Sharon is.
All right.
If people want an insider with allegiance to Bucky, they can look to another character named Carter in that same issue. I guess she's with the next one. Yeah.
But yeah, just that's a easy peek behind. Spoiler alert: we don't. Steve and Sharon's relationship is too important for us to like turn it into a double cross. Like there's been so much secret kind of, false flagging between the two of them that like we just really wanted to give them something authentic now. But yes, to Jack's point, the situation that puts her in front of him is the maneuver that he's making, right? Because you don't need to tell her to go fuck up his life. You just need to let her go.
Right.
And she will show up into his life and create all the chaos that he possibly
and what he's really doing there is picking Steve back up, right?
Mm-hmm.
What he's putting her there is allowing Steve, somebody in his life who's going to do
because he didn't have Bucky anymore.
He needs, exactly. Which is something that Bucky really couldn't do, which is inspire this hope in Steve that he can move forward, like remind him what it's like to get back on this horse and be a superhero, which is what she did back in the day as his partner in S.H.I.E.L.D., right? So like they have a long-standing relationship outside of their romance that's about her kind of showing him the ropes and keeping him going, even though he's a man at a time. So it felt like a great chance to use both those things. What we actually meant by it's not romance-based is not because we're going to break them up. That's not what we're talking about. What we meant was it's not even Steve-based. What we have planned for Sharon is Sharon-based. And that's still all I can say.
Okay. I like that.
Watch what's up with her in the next few issues of Sentinel of Liberty, and I think it'll start to unpack itself.
All right. So while we're on the subject of Steve's love life, in episode 123, which is 2 episodes from now, which happens to be right after Valentine's Day, we are doing a top 10 list of Steve's love interests.
Oh, sure.
Do you guys want to put your votes in now for your top 3 all time?
Sharon, Bernie, Peggy.
All right. So Jackson votes for Sharon, Bernie, and Peggy. Colin is scratching his head.
No, I mean, I'd be hard pressed to come up with a better 3 list. But gosh darn it.
Rachel?
Say the artist from
maybe a little Rachel Diamondback action.
Diamondback. I just reread those issues. God damn, she's a trash fire. Like, it is the worst relationship. And it's so funny because they're like, oh, Steve Rogers is such a well put. It's like, dude, you are. She has got you around her finger. Like, she is. We've all dated that girl, right? She's like a beautiful disaster. And you're just like, I can't get away from you. You're under my skin. But like, whew, I mean, not that she didn't have a tough life. Diamondback, so that's a hell of a journey she was on. But like,
right.
What a why? Because you're at no point are you like, oh yeah, Steve Rogers, he should be dating the fucking tornado damage, like after the Chaos Kremlin. It just
are you saying she's white? Are you saying she's from the trailer park? What do you?
No. I just mean like, she's just such a she's just so broken.
Can I totally bust this up though and change my answer?
Yeah, please do. Yeah,
there we go.
Number 3, Bernie. Number 2, Sharon. Number 1, Bucky.
Oh, all right.
I don't think anyone lives in Steve Rogers' heart more than Bucky does.
That's fair. That's fair. We did say love interest. I don't know if that.
No, I'm not saying it's a romantic thing.
I get it. It's a bromance. I get it.
Thing, and it is a romance for the ages.
It's true. That's fair.
So getting to issue 8, which features our heroes mysteriously waking up spread among the country as AIM has taken over Manhattan. Steve calls in a favor from the mutant telepath, Emma Frost, to go into their minds and see how their memories were wiped. we're introduced to the fifth and perhaps final star point, MODOK. This leads to a question from one of our patrons, Grant Baugh, who asks, has there been any instructions from the editorial team to have you include story elements based on what is happening or what is going to happen in the Marvel Cinematic Universe? For example, in issue 8, we see a new version of MODOK, as it appears that MODOK with a K will play a role in the forthcoming Ant-Man Quantumania movie. So I wondered if that was just a coincidence or specific editorial notes.
Is MODOK going to be an Ant-Man?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, it's in the trailer. But not
Spoiler.
They're doing something weird. I'll tell you what they're doing after the
but no, that's purely us being like, man, wouldn't it be rad if we had a super cool new MODOK?
Yeah, that's literally us being like, no, trust us. No one told us, hey, use MODOK. We had the star points from the get go, and we were like, we knew we had this last one, and we were like, what would be the creepiest thing we could do? We really want a creepy star point, one who can like live in your brain and really be just like a real creepster. We want like an Immortal Hulk vibe on this one. And I think actually where it started was Mark Brooks's cover for Captain America 0. His cover is a wraparound with all of the Captain America heroes.
Yeah, beautiful.
Everyone that we were all going to use over the course of the run. So Shuri from Sam's run, and even characters who haven't shown up all that much in our run, like Natasha, but like they knew who we were going to use, and they put them all in there. One of the few in there that we haven't used, and that we didn't really have any plans to use, was MODOK. Mostly because MODOK is spoken for in the X office. He's a huge part of Orcus and everything that's been going on in the X office, and we didn't really want to like bug them too much about using their toys. But Mark drew this just real ugly, scary MODOK. And MODOK has traditionally, in the last few years, been a comedy character, which I have never been a huge fan of, if I'm being honest. Like, he's fine as a comedy character. Like the Patton Oswalt version is not my version of the character as much as I appreciate it. What I think is really cool about MODOK is when you take the design seriously and go, that is a big head with little tiny arms. And infinite killing potential, and it wants to kill you, right? There's no fun about it. It's having fun killing you, but that doesn't mean it's funny or it's fun. And like, I think I traded a couple of DMs with Mark about it, where I was just like, man, I love this MODOK. He's so spooky. And Mark was like, yeah, I know, he's a really spooky character. I love it. And we're like, great. And that was sort of it. And I think after that, we were just sort of sitting there being like, when can we do creepy MODOK? Like, that's got to be the move. And then when we started to break arc 2, we knew we wanted this final star point. We knew it was going to be somebody who got in your head. We're like, well, okay, what if we flop the K for a C, make it a shadow personality so that we're not playing with the X-Men version of MODOK. So we're playing with our own version of MODOK, mental organism designed only for control. And then really let that explore itself out and see what it means for MODOK to have his own, like, for MODOK to be the Bucky Barnes to MODOK's Winter Soldier, right? That they have his own like shadow.
Oh, yes.
Wow. I am so glad. I am so glad that Grant asked that question, because I would never have thought there were two different MODOKs. So thank you for explaining that.
It'll get spun out more specifically in the next issue. Okay. We explained it a little bit in there in the flashback as he introduces himself, but the actual like what's up with this will be answered in issue 9.
Got it. All right. So now let's talk Cold War. So Marvel has been teasing this for months.
Ooh, got Brisk in here.
Well, we're finally seeing some details, right? From what I've read, it starts with Sentinel of Liberty number 11 as the prelude. Goes to Captain America Cold War Alpha one shot, which is out in mid-April. And then we've got Sentinel of Liberty 12 and 13. And then Sam's book, right? Symbol of Truth. 12 and 13.
Symbol 12, Sentinel 12, Symbol 13, Sentinel 13.
Right. And then it ends with an Omega one shot.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So what can you tell listeners about this story, and why should they pick it up if they don't get the other series? And what prompted this story, and what makes it so large that it has to be told in this manner?
Yes. So let's start with what prompted it, and then we can tell you what it is. We knew, for the first time in a long time, there's a Captain America line of books. We have 2 different Captain America books that are interacting with one another, doing cool stuff, making cool stuff. And it felt like we didn't want to go too long before we smashed those toys together and saw what happened with these two Captain Americas and their threads. So we just knew sort of right off the bat, we really want to do this. It became pretty clear that editorial had the same interest early in the game, and had thrown out the idea of putting them into something that could reasonably be called Cold War. Like, this was sort of a Secret Wars thing where they were like, we just think the title is cool. And we were like, okay, maybe that's the title, maybe not. We'll see. Like, we're not going to anchor ourselves to it, but it's a neat idea. Plus, you know, it means something within the context of Sentinel with the Outer Circle and all that. So maybe there's a play. And then we really just let the germination of it work between Tochi and us naturally. Yeah. We are friends, we talk, we have a good rapport, we plot with one another. We really respect what he's doing in his book. I think he likes what we're doing. So ideally, we were finding ways to, we were reading each other's scripts and just finding those cool threads. We're like, oh, well, what's White Wolf doing in this issue? Oh, what's the Outer Circle doing in this issue? How can we find a way to take these things and thread them together? And then when we finally got enough critical mass of plot, that's when Cold War happened.
Well, yeah, and also dramatically, we knew that it was going to be so incredibly important to bring these two back together, not just because, hoorah, we love smashing things, we love, you know, when our toys crash together, but because Steve and Sam are, in the same way that Bucky and Steve are effectively, you know, brothers. I think you could say that Sam is probably the closest he has to a, you know, to a best friend in a lot of ways, right? Like, so
in
watching
superhero community, certainly.
So watching as these two men kind of really stepped into their, you know, kind of new definitions of who Captain America was as they've both taken on the shield, we knew that we wanted to bring them back together so that they could shine a light and reflect on each other who they've become and how they've evolved. But also that is incredibly disingenuous to do in one book or the other. So like creating a crossover, if we only created the crossover so that we could respect the interaction of these two men, I think we'd be in the clear. Luckily, we also developed a boatload of amazing adventure and plot that we started to explore and inject into this in a really cool way that, yes, kind of builds to be too big for any one book.
In terms of what that plot is, we've been pretty cagey up until now, and I think we're going to continue to be pretty cagey up until the point at which we blow it wide open. I think we don't want people to know too much about what's going down in Alpha until they get to Alpha, because it will become clear. Suffice to say, here's what people know. They know that this is going to involve both threads from both books. It's going to involve the Outer Circle. It's going to involve Bucky Barnes. It's going to involve White Wolf. Who has been on his own, you know, journey of sort of megalomaniacal conquest, and kind of becoming a Red Skull to Sam's Captain America. Okay, well, we know we have those pieces on the table, and we know that they're going to interact. We know that we're bringing in some characters who haven't been shown as much in the sort of Captain America universe as of late. The most important of which is Ian Rogers, a character that has been lying fallow for a little while, certainly since Secret Wars. And has come back into Symbol and started to showcase that he has a little bit of secret life that Steve is unaware of, and has sort of been living as Nomad to not a lot of success.
Which, to speaking back to an earlier question, was not one of the things that we had planned.
Yeah, we had no plans for him.
We didn't really plan on touching Ian until it was Tochi was like, "Ooh, I really want to use Ian Rogers," and we said, "Well, goodness gracious, if you're going to be planting him, then obviously that's something that we need to pay off in a big way."
And what we all did was we all sat down to talk about what it would look like to tell a story with Ian Rogers and what's interesting about Ian, and where we can, like we have with Bucky, build new story territory for him to move, like Tochi has done with White Wolf or Falcon. Like, open up new space so that this character has stories that reasonably you could go and tell more Ian Rogers stories. But to do that, we had to figure out a great plot to mechanize around him, and one that didn't distract from Steve and Sam. One that allowed this to be a book about Steve and Sam and Misty and Sharon, because that's really who this book is about. However, you're going to have characters from both runs as well in it, including, I think we've teased out the return of Natasha to the book as Black Widow. And all of these people are
Misty Knight.
Misty, I said, yeah, Misty and Sharon. And we're going to be smashing all of this together in a conflict that none of them can stop alone. And I genuinely can't say more than that. I feel like I've got like the Marvel snipers on me, but these are this is just my own variety. I really think this story is best if you come into it cold. No pun intended. with the knowledge of the other books. I think it's very useful to have read Symbol. I think it's very useful to have read Sentinel. If you haven't read either, we will recap them and get you up to speed. But if you have read them, I think you're gonna find this is very much the climax of both books, and is utilizing both books' story to like tell a big fundamental moment for both books.
And I actually just checked. The official solicit does mention Dimension Z.
Oh, does it?
It does.
Oh, well, then there you go, guys. Suffice to say, whatever we're doing with Ian, we're taking him back to the place that he doesn't want to be, and that Steve doesn't want to be, and that Sam never wanted to see. Dimension Z.
Yeah.
But what Dimension Z is now, with Zola off the table for this long, is a big question mark, and is going to be driving forward some interesting new plot elements. Plus, Dimension Z isn't like coming out of nowhere. If you're reading Symbol, right. It's obviously been a thread of White Wolf's plan, so it's a natural crossover for us, and a chance for us to return to something that we've always thought was a really like iconic and interesting moment in Steve's history that doesn't get referenced all that often, or followed up on. So we figured if we're going to do Ian, we might as well do Dimension Z and really blow it out.
I mean, in the same way that if you're going to lionize Brubaker's run as one of the seminal moments for Cap, like I think Rick Remender's run is fucking awesome, and like all the stuff in Dimension Z, I think is so pivotal and important to Steve being able to circle back around and kind of bring that to life and examine what that really means, what it means. What does fatherhood mean in this context for Steve, who is just getting back to being a normal man, suddenly having to be a dad? That's a lot of weight for anyone to carry. But luckily we know that Steve Rogers, if there's one thing he does great, it's carry weight. So it's going to be a really interesting and thrilling adventure into Dimension Z, where things might get
happen.
Chilly.
Yeah, things will happen.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, we're going to see Steve reunited with Ian in Cold War, and there's so much emotion, so much doubt and concern over Bucky, and now he's going to be faced with Ian. Is he going to be able to forgive Ian for keeping his being alive a secret?
Scene 1, man. Scene 1. We're going to cover this. I promise.
Scene 1. All right.
I can't wait.
Like Cold War. I guess scene 2 of Cold War is going to be all about this.
Because these are the exact questions. I mean, like
these exact questions. Yeah.
And you don't want to, it comes back to some advice we got just when we started this book was get to the good stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Don't dance around it. Don't slow burn for many, like have a mystery. Absolutely. But when there's something critical, like the drama, the understanding of a relationship, just get to it.
Yeah,
man, take it apart later, but set it up early so that people.
Is that an alpha?
That is an alpha. Cold War. I'll even tell you. Steve is reunited with Ian before Captain America.
Okay.
Like we come into that with them already together. The thing that I'm excited to see ultimately is not the tension of like, can Steve forgive this man? Because Steve got a lot of other stuff on his mind. It's when the inciting incident of our book happens, and I can't tell you what that is, but when the thing that really kicks off this plot happens, that is going to push us into a space where Steve is going to be pushed. Steve has already lost a lot. He's lost his he's lost his best friend. He's lost his mission in many ways. He has lost, by that point, more than I can talk about because of what's happening in the Invader. And he is going to really be looking at his life and trying to figure out like what it means to go forward for him. And what he encounters from Ian and what plot that kicks off and what storyline that brings about is going to force Steve to ask some really fundamental questions about his ability to keep going and his ability to do so while maintaining his decency. Like this is going to be in many ways his lowest point. Cold War is going to be about what it means to fight through that. It's a complicated story for Steve, and it's one that's going to push Steve to places that he does not normally go. As Dimension Z did, right? There's a reason we're going to Dimension Z, because it's a really awesome place to take Steve Rogers and be like, man, you don't handle this well. Sometimes this, like, it's one of his weaknesses is that place brings a darkness out of Steve. And so seeing what it means for that to hit him at a moment when he is most vulnerable to darkness is something that we're really interested in looking at. Not because evil Steve is cool, but because Steve in that moment of darkness is at his most Steve, and and can show us most what decency is and what it means.
It is only in the dark that you can see someone's light.
Yeah, effectively.
And I obviously, any fans of ours who have read our Kang book know that we have very complicated relationships with our fathers. And in a lot of ways, Kang is the worst possible dad, right? Nathaniel Richards had so much potential, but Kang himself, in the cycles of abuse that he perpetuates, doesn't see what he's doing to his own son, to his own self. Steve Rogers is eyes open, my guys. Like, he knows, he sees what he does, and that even seeing it does not necessarily mean you can stop these things from happening. Like, he is, in a lot of ways, the best possible dad, but that still doesn't mean that it's easy or that he's good at it.
And he seems like he would be the best dad.
Yeah.
Doesn't necessarily mean he is, or that he knows how to live up to that.
Even being a good dad is incredibly complicated for anyone.
So
amen.
So what I'm hearing you say is that I need to read this alone because I'm an ugly crier.
I hope so.
It's just shocking to my family. So
we always say it. The watchword of the hive mind is we want your tears. We want them.
All right, we have a few other questions to get to that listeners have sent in. We're going to do rapid fire.
Yeah,
just get through this real quick, right?
For real this time. Sometimes our rapid fires can take longer than our normal.
I recall. All right, so Ash Barnes, that you know from Twitter, right?
Hi, Ash. Good to hear from you again.
Big Bucky Barnes fan. She writes, in a past interview, you guys talked about how in this book, Bucky will finally have a chance to process the true weight of how much wrong he's done, and how, quote, that kind of intense self-reflection can sometimes make you step too far and can make you step into shadows that you weren't aware you could step into, unquote. We've already started to see him step into those shadows. How much more of that will we see from him in Cold War? And what can you tease about how far he's willing to go?
Yeah, that is the question of Cold War.
That was a good answer. That was a rapid fire. I'm proud of you.
I don't know how to answer that. Like, Cold War is our answer to that.
He is going to do some things in the next, let's say, 10 issues. Over the next source of stories, he's going to be crossing some more lines that he never thought he would ever do. And as much as all of this is twisting Steve apart, trust us when we say it is ruining Bucky as well.
Yeah, they are both going through it.
Yeah.
All right, so he's moving in on Sharon. Okay, got it.
You shut your mouth.
All right. Matthew Glover asks, love this run of Captain America, and I look forward to each issue. Given that Cap has an eidetic memory, do you think that Steve Rogers has any post-traumatic stress from his time in World War II or with the Avengers? If so, is that a theme or idea you have any interest in exploring?
And you guys did bring this up because, example of Steve recalling the names of the soldiers he served with when he was in Germany investigating the Forge.
I think Cap absolutely has PTSD. I'm not a veteran. I can't speak to that. I have veterans in my family. I don't think you can go to war and not have it change you. I think Steve has been to war more than anyone else. If it didn't change him, his eyes wouldn't have been open. I don't think it stopped him, but if at some point we had the opportunity to tell a story that was just diving down into Steve's specific war PTSD, I think that'd be incredibly fascinating. Man, that book would hurt.
Yeah, it's funny. I almost think like we're just not necessarily the guys to write that, as interesting as it is, and I don't disagree with Colin in any respect. Yeah. I want to elaborate, but honestly, it would just be an essay that I would be talking about stuff I don't really understand. So I think I'm just going to leave it at that.
So another question, is it easier or more challenging writing for the trade publication or story arc or for a single issue? Do you think your work reads better all at once or broken up?
No idea, man.
Yeah, you tell me.
Yeah,
out of preference.
Impossible for me to see my work as a reader.
What we will say is that one-off issues can be far more challenging because you have to tell so much interesting plot, drama, and character in 22 pages or 20 pages, which can be a real bear. If you're telling a longer form story, obviously you get to let things breathe a little bit more, but at the same time you lose the kineticism of the single issue format. So I think we write 4 single issues, and hopefully everyone gets a fucking, you get $9 out of comics out of that $4.50 you just spent. But when it all comes together, it's a perfectly built puzzle piece, and you're going to love the trade.
That's the objective.
All right, I think I know what your answer is going to be to this one, but James Foley asks, it was discussed at length at my local comic shop when issue 6 came out and how quickly it read. When you compare it to issue 5, it is astounding that 6 only has 3 pages with dialogue, and so many pages had such big splash pages and fight scenes. Was this the intention, or was it done to stretch the story out? The conversation at the shop was it's an example of making the arc fit the mold of a trade paperback format, and this would have been much better had it condensed back in the 70s and 80s.
Sure. Totally no. There was no consideration about, we got to pad the story. In fact,
Add the story. I want to travel to that fucking shop and bop them all in the fucking nose. We got out of Carmen's way. Yeah, dude, we wrote that we had all sorts of dialogue. They were talking and having monologues as they kicked the ever-loving shit out of each other. Then you get those pages and you're like, why am I covering this with my ding-dang words?
Yeah.
Like, they are saying everything they need to with each other.
It happened during the writing process. We were in the middle of that issue, and we got to the line where Steve goes, "There's nothing left to say." And I genuinely think I turned to Colin and I was like, "What if he's right?"
It's like, no, we just spent
what if
days writing all of this dialogue.
Like, what if there really is nothing left to say between these guys once they get there, because they kind of are spinning their wheels in all of this dialogue. And the action and Carmen, right? Because we are working with Carmen Carnero, an absolute modern master of an artist. Like, I would just put her art next to anyone in comics. She has an incredible ability to do high-level action that is incredibly clear and fill it with emotional stakes. You can tell Carmen to express a line on the character's face, and she can do it, right? Without your dialogue. So it just became really clear that this would be more powerful. Yes, it might read faster. I hope it doesn't, right? I hope the idea is actually you sit in that action and let it flow. But if you can read it fast if you want.
Well, it's read it, right? It's always funny when you're like, oh, I'm reading.
Yeah, but you're reading the comic.
Yeah, whatever.
But like, the idea behind it was really to set the tone, to set the mood, and then get out of Carmen's way and let her just go nuts. To the point about trade format and like how that operates, we were already stretching the story by making it 6 issues. Marvel prefers 5-issue arcs. 6 issues was already us being like, guys, we need it for this. We could have told that story in 8 issues. Like, we felt like we had Sentinel of Liberty arc 1 was like going about as fast a tempo as we could go for it. And I know in our case, like, we would have been happy to slow down and express that over even longer periods. But we never considered that. That was never like something that we were able to do. We always started this at, here is a 6-issue arc, because that's what comics will allow, and that's how.
But also, like, the last issue will be almost exclusively a fight scene. That was always part.
Yeah.
And what a glorious scene. I mean, you're right. Carmen is absolutely a master. Some of the facial expressions.
You see issue 10.
Hey, listen, I'm still stuck on the shower scene.
So's the internet.
Internet moved on to mommy.
Mommy.
I want to tell you, we wrote that beat before we knew that it had been set up. We wrote that beat. We were like, the funniest thing he could call her is mommy. And then we read the beat in. We went back to just like do our due diligence and read Hellfire Gala, and I was like, it's right there. Like, there's a whole setup for this gag specifically, as if they knew it was coming. And I was just very happy.
It was nice.
I got to tell Teenie Howard that the other day, and she was very happy about it.
That's great.
On the same synergy, the issue with AIM, issue 7 was released the same day, like 40 years ago, when in Captain America, when AIM invaded
the last time AIM invaded Manhattan. Yeah, I know. Wow.
Funny world.
So patron Aaron Paul asks, from the beginning.
Aaron Paul?
Love your work on
Aaron,
Breaking
Man, real big fan.
From the beginning of your time with Steve, you have all made good on your promise of delving into the details and unexplored parts of Steve and Bucky's relationship. As, quote, Sam's biggest fan, I'm hoping that, again, quote, the Cap Collective, which he refers to Alana, Tochi, Jackson, and Colin, will treat the fans to having Bucky, Sam, and Steve in a bar setting after the Cold War concludes. What would Steve, Bucky, and Sam order? Anyway, great run so far, and please get to 50 issues minimum. P.S. Please get John Walker and Clint in a regular rotation in the series. Mayor Cage might get tired of Clint soon.
Man, can Aaron be the president of Marvel Comics forever? I love all of this. This is great.
We'll do all that.
Yep.
Great.
What would they drink?
I mean, Steve drinks beer. I think that's effectively been established most of the time. Like if Steve's at a bar, he's drinking a beer. I imagine it's a German beer. I think he started drinking in Germany. So
I think he drinks Pilsners. Yeah, I think he drinks Pilsners. He doesn't. He'll have an IPA, but it's like,
it's not his thing.
No, it's really not his thing.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to drink lawn.
Oh, come on. He's not going to drink a Sam Adams.
There's a story. No. No. I'm
That's
That was
patriotic.
definitive right there.
No.
Jack, that no was canon.
I don't know about Sam. I know Sam. I don't know what Sam drinks. Does Sam drink?
I mean, he has to drink. He has to get a.
Oh yeah, there was times where back in I think it was a De Mateus run where Sam and Steve were in a bar and they kind of drank a little too much, and then they went out into the alleyway to try to stop a fight. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think Bucky drinks old fashions.
I think that tracks.
I feel like Sam might be like a tiki drink man.
I love that idea.
Right? Like
he did spend a lot of time.
Well, he's just such a fucking badass that he's like, yeah, I'm having a fucking tiki drink. I like daiquiris. He'd be like, oh,
love it. That's great. That's great. Love that. Sharon drinks whiskey neat.
yes.
That's she's done that. Like she drinks whiskey neat and gets in fights. Don't go to a bar and drink with Sharon too long. That's it'll turn into a fight scene.
John Walker's on our short list of people we're trying to find places for him. He never fits anywhere, but he's always like the first person cut.
Yeah, he was initially in Sentinel. We have over and over again, we have placed John into books, and he always gets cut. He's always like, he's here because we want him to be, not because he should be.
Right.
Always pulling him out. He was almost on the New Invaders, right? Like he's always somewhere near the story, and we just end up being like, we have too much to handle. We don't have room for John. So hopefully someday, when we can use him right, well, we would love to use John Walker. We think he's great.
Yeah. Okay. John Walker and Clint Barton, agents of Luke, agents of Cage.
You heard it here first.
There you go. All right. I see a new miniseries. All right. One last question for me is I have to ask, are you guys carrying the What Would Cap Do challenge coin? Because you do know how challenge coins work, right?
I do. Yes.
Okay. Because Bob was a 25-year Marine, so he could tell you the premise of a challenge coin.
My brother was military. I know
you got it.
Challenge coin. I do not keep the Cap challenge coin on me because and for good reason. I recently my wallet was destroyed, and I didn't have a wallet. I was keeping it in that wallet for a little bit, but that was also like on my phone, so it was a metal thing pressed against my phone. I wasn't psyched about that. I just got this new wallet. It's too thin, and I tried to put it in, and it didn't work. So it sits on my desk. We actually have a couple of other challenge coins that have been given to us over the years by comics people. I have one from the FDNY from one of their
nice.
Who he came and asked us to talk about the 9/11 survivors in Star Trek. And talk about sort of what was going on with their sort of medical thing, and see if we could use Star Trek to talk about that. And we ended up doing it in a way, but he gave us the challenge coin as a challenge. He was like, "I'm giving this to you to remind you to do this," which I thought was really impactful to me. So those two sit next to each other on my desk. But
I believe him, Bob. I believe him.
I do. He seems believable.
You're not making up a giant lie.
Seems trustworthy. Yeah.
Also, it's a lovely coin. Thank you.
Oh, of course. Well, all right, listeners, you heard this. Yeah, next round is on Jackson if you challenge him. So, all right. But besides Cap, what else is keeping you busy in 2023? I know you've got One Bad Day, Clayface. You told us about that last time. It's coming out soon.
And we
I
just
heard about Guardians of the Galaxy. You got a big event for Star Trek. So tell us.
Well, you just did a pretty good job of it. Folks who are listening to this, Clayface, One Bad Day is going to be coming out soon. It's absolutely
next month.
It's an absolutely gorgeous piece of work. Some of the best art I've ever seen in a book we've worked on. And it's
Zermanica. Just incredible.
Effectively taking all of the toxicity we've been forced to swallow in Hollywood for the last decade and a half and regurgitating it into a Clayface story. It's very cathartic. It's fucking mean.
Yeah.
But it's a villain story, so it really fits well. So
we don't write a lot of horror. We're not really horror writers. We like dabbling in it here and there, but it's not like our core genre. This is like what if we did a horror book that felt like us? Like, what's our version of horror? Which was very much just like, yeah, as Colin said, purging a lot of really dark Hollywood stuff.
Over at IDW, our Star Trek book, which is Star Trek flagship story, following the adventures of Benjamin Sisko, is going to be crossing over with Star Trek Defiant, which is written by Chris Cantwell, into our first Omni series, our big, much like Cold War. It is called Day of Blood, and it is the ultimate kind of the culmination of the first year of storytelling that we've been doing between those two books, going to Kronos and showing the secret face behind a rising Klingon threat, which is a story we've been building for almost 10 years now in the back of our mind.
Wow.
We've been working on this one for a long time in various respects. So it's very exciting.
And Chris Cantwell is an awesome writer.
Yeah. He was our first call. We were friends. We lived close by. He became a friend. We became friends because he DM'd me about Star Trek Year 5 during the pandemic and talked about how much he loved it. And I happened to have been watching *Halt and Catch Fire* at the same time and was like, oh my God, I'm geeking out, dude. I love your work. And we just ended up becoming good friends. And he kept asking me over the pandemic, like, hey, can you help me write some Star Trek? Like, anytime I can write some Star Trek, I'd really love to. And there weren't really any opportunities. It's like the Year 5 room had been long closed. And when we started up on Star Trek and we pitched Defiant, and they were like, yeah, but you can't write both. We were like, well, okay, then Chris has to write Defiant. And thank God he was available and psyched to do it, because he has defined that book. Like, he's really just made it into his own beautiful thing. In
a super small, weird world, Chris actually went to school with us. He was a few years ahead of us. He was a senior or a graduate student when I was a freshman. But I recall distinctly seeing him as an upperclassman and being like, I don't know who that guy is, but he seems so goddamn cool. I hope when I am an upperclassman, I will be as cool as that stranger.
How many times have you told Chris that?
Oh, of course. I gassed him up, but it was just crazy because the first time I met, I sat there for like a good 45 minutes being like, God, this guy looks like someone I once knew. It's like, yeah, it was him. It's like, cool, great.
Wow, that's
perfect
cool.
Example of meeting your heroes. Our sequel series to Batman Beyond is going to be coming out later this year, picking up kind of exactly where we left Terry, looking at a brand new side of Neo Gotham and some of the corners of it that have yet to not even be explored in not only the comics, but in the show as well. Gotham is a fascinating and wonderful place that has the entire history of Batman built into it. So why would we just want to play with some of the toys when we can play with all of them?
It's been very exciting to sort of that book. The fans really showed up, and that's been one of those places where we've been lucky enough to get to tell more stories with Terry and in Neo Gotham. And we're really honored. It's going to be a blast.
Yep. And then, of course, Guardians of the Galaxy, which is our new hot Marvel joint, which we're going to be bringing out. It's with Kev Walker, bringing out some amazing art. Obviously, we created that synergy in Captain America Winter Soldier Annual #1, and that rolled right into Guardians of the Galaxy. It was an amazing opportunity from Darren Shen, who's the editor, to give us a chance to swing. And
it's really a hell of a thing, if only because they are really letting us do something fundamentally different. If you've never read a Guardians book before, fine. If you've only seen the movies, honestly, this is very different. It's a lot of the same characters, but we are pushing into new territory. We're really trying to like shake it up and find new stuff in these characters by putting them into a new genre, into a new feel, into a new tone. So it's Guardians of the Galaxy as like a grim, weird Western with a very wicked sense of humor.
It sounds cool.
We've been kind of pitching it as like Forgiven meets Next Wave.
I saw the poncho.
It's we put Peter in a poncho, that's all you need to know.
Yeah, there's one of the things that, there's so many ways to define what a space Western is. It almost doesn't mean anything. So once you start to lens in on no, it needs the brutality of an Unforgiven, right? Like this is the West is harsh. The West is sad. The West is tragic because we know ultimately almost every story in the West is going to fail. Which when you put the Guardians against that, especially the Guardians as most people know them, is this kind of like plucky group of scoundrels. It's like, that's really not who they are in the 616. And that is certainly not who they're going to be as we advance our story.
So it's going to be some new stories with Quill and Gamora and Nebula and Drax and Mantis. And they are going up against something that we've Marvel's been sort of like vaguely teasing, and that will continue to vaguely tease a great new threat in a great new part of space. And that threat is called Grootfall. But what Grootfall is, how it comes about it, how it impacts the team, and where Groot and Rocket are is going to be a question that we're going to be answering over the course of that first arc. So tell your store, if you're listening to this, you really don't want to miss that book. If you've been enjoying what we're doing on Cap, I think you'll really dig what we're doing on Guardians. It's going to be a heck of a book. And honestly, Kev is just doing the work of his career. Like he came on because he had such a great experience with us on Winter Soldier, because the way that Kev works is very collaborative. He changes stuff in your script all the time. Yeah. He'll just he'll write you an essay as to why. So unlike a lot of artists who just kind of rise to your challenge, Kev goes I don't think he thought about this hard enough, and figures out his own.
He challenges you.
He does. And what that creates is a really interesting feedback loop of storytelling potential, kind of exactly what Colin and I do. So it was just extending that brand framework out to a legendary artist like Ken Walker, which has been a absolute delight. So really looking forward to people getting a real glimpse of what's going on there, because I don't think any of his art is public yet, and it's excited his designs. It's really
we'll have to check that out. And I highly encourage all the listeners, if you've been enjoying Captain America: Sentinel of Liberty, check out Colin and Jackson's other work, because I'm sure they're knocking it out of the park for that just as well. And as a reminder, the Captain America Sentinel of Liberty trade paperback Volume 1 Revolution hits comic shops next week, February 8th. So while you're at the shop or wherever you get your comics, picking that up, don't forget to place your pre-order for the Cold War crossover with the Sam book, Symbol of Truth, including the Alpha and Omega bookend one-shots. Guys, Colin, Jackson, thanks so much for joining the show.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Rick, Bob, absolute pleasure.
And a ball.
Thank you for telling everyone to pre-order. Honestly, coolest thing you guys can do. Coolest thing anybody listening to this can do. Pre-order your comic books. It doesn't need to be Sentinel of Liberty. Pre-order your comics. If you love a comic, make sure that your store knows you want to pre-order it, because that's how this stuff stays alive. It's really, it really means the world to all of us when you do that.
A little, somewhere out there, a little angel of comic shops just got its wings.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Great rapid cap, guys.
All right. Cheers.
We always love chatting with you guys, so really appreciate the hosting.
All right. Take care.
All right.
Ciao. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
All right. Well, that was a very lengthy interview. We appreciate Jackson and Colin's time for coming on the show and speaking with us and answering the questions to many of our listeners and patrons who have sent those in. So thank you for those questions. What'd you think, Bob?
That was amazing. I lost track of time, Rick. It was just so there was so much energy. I want to say in the room. We're not all in the room. We're in 3 different rooms. But it was really energetic, and it was really great to get some insights into the way they approach this series. And I'm really, as I said, I'm super excited to learn the history of these star points and who else might have been on the roster previously, going back to its initial founding, and so much to look forward to in the future. So I think, there's a lot of great stuff coming down the pipe.
Yeah, 100%. I'm looking forward to Cold War. I'm looking forward to what comes after. Sounds like these guys have got a lot of great ideas, and they know what they can do and what they can't do. I thought it was a very honest answer about the whole PTSD, in that it's a story that they would be interested in, but not something that they felt comfortable writing. And so I respect that. I respect the fact that these guys know what their lanes are, and they're very good at what they do, and I've enjoyed the series so far. I think the Steve Rogers is in very capable hands.
Oh, I would agree. I agree 100%. And I appreciate all of the effort that they put into not only making it entertaining, but making it informational as well, right? A little bit of edutainment with the historical focus and just the depth of the writing and the balance between action and emotion. I mean, there was one point in the interview when, Jackson was talking about, Bucky having, sort of move the pieces to bring Sharon back to Steve because he knew that Steve would need her at this point. That I got like little goosebumps all over me from that because, that
I like
really
that too.
Yeah, that's the depth of emotion that they are weaving through this tale that has some great action as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So, highly again recommend if you don't have Symbol of Truth, the Sam series on your pull list, go ahead and put the request in for those 2 issues now. And then of course the Cold War Alpha and Omega one shots. So highly recommend that. And also too, check out the trade paperback if you haven't read any of the issues yet. It'll be out next week. So go pick that up. All right, Bob. One of the things that both those guys touched on was how important the Dimension Z story and Ian Rogers is going to be in the upcoming issues, and especially in Cold War. So we thought, hey, with that tie-in, what's going on, that would make for a very good extended storyline that we're going to do over the course of several episodes. So starting next episode 122, we are going to get into Captain America Volume 7, number 1, and it's a 10-part series. So we're going to do this on the second Wednesday of every month, kicking off in February for the next 10 months. We're going to pick one issue. So next one, we're going to do Castaway and Dimension Z, which is the first part of that story. And then a month later, we'll do number 2. But yeah, this is the Rick Remender, John Romita Jr. series. And by the way, I don't know if you know this, Bob, but Rick Remender is celebrating a birthday. He will actually have a birthday 5 days from now. So February 6th is his birthday. So another good reason just to kick off the series.
Yep. And happy birthday, Rick, by the way, and the other Rick. And of course, I got to give you credit for this, Rick. I mean, this isn't a series I paid a lot of attention to when it came out, but I kind of read through it and didn't really get that invested in it. But you encouraged me and other readers in the Facebook group to give it a second chance. And I went back and I reread it, and it hit me a completely different way the second time around with a more careful and deliberate reading. And so I think a lot of folks out there, maybe after the Brubaker run, didn't give this the love that it needed at the time, and they should go back and read it. And I hope they're encouraged to do so by us covering the Castaway and Dimension Z. Yep,
I agree. And also, listeners probably caught on. I mentioned the following episode 123, which comes out the day after Valentine's Day. Bob, we're going to do our next top 10 list. I can't believe it has been over 100 episodes, actually over 110 episodes since we've done our last top 10. We did an episode 9. We did top 10 villains not named Red Skull. And then we haven't done a top 10 since then, Bob. Why? What's wrong with that?
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. We don't count did we do a top 10 retcons or something? Or was that, it was like 9 or something?
Yeah. Okay, sure. Yeah, we'll throw that in there.
All right. Oh.
Yeah. I mean, hey, we're going to retcon it and say, yes, we did.
Nice. But it doesn't hit the same way as a top 10 list, right? In the traditional sense. So
we're going to ask this. Yeah, we're going to ask our listeners and our Facebook members. We need you to vote. We want you to call in. We want you to vote on the Facebook page. We want to hear from you who are the top 10 love interests of Captain America. Now, and I'm going to throw that out there. We did say Captain America. We didn't say Steve Rogers.
That's a twist.
Yeah.
That's a twist.
Maybe
Maybe
there's a little Sam love interest in there too, huh?
Yeah.
Possibly. I don't know.
This is a twist.
We're opening it up to the listeners.
Yeah.
So that will be 2 episodes from now in episode 123.
All right.
All right, Bob. As always, it's been fun wrapping cap with you.
I can't wait till next week, Rick. Let's do this again.
All right. He's Bob Lucius. I'm Rick Verbanis, and you have been listening to another episode of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast.